welcome back to part 2 of our discussion with Mr. Fabian Lewis, who is the Radio and Telecommunications Manager at the Department of Disaster Management and Emergencies. You're tuned to Disaster 365 radio show, aired on Radio Turks and Caicos 89.1 FM. I'm your host, Alison Gordon. Mr. Lewis, it's so good to have you back, sir. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much for having me yet again. Hello, TCI.
All right, so good to have you back. Good to have you back. We had a very, very insightful and interesting discussion last week. So we're now back with part 2. And I want to start off by asking a very important question. Telecommunications play a huge role, a critical role in emergency response. Can you tell us about some of the key advancements or achievements in our telecommunication systems that have improved our readiness and response efforts?
I'll be glad to appraise you of that, Ms. Gordon. One of the advancements that we have achieved thus far is the ability to have HF radio throughout all the islands. What I'm saying in layman's terms is that we have high frequency radios, which are two-way radios, positioned in all the islands that allow for inter-island communication. And this communication I'm talking about is external of any other network, which means aside from the radio that we have installed, we are not reliant on any other provider to effect any kind of communication. That allows for us to speak with all the islands. So in other words, Providenciales can speak to Granta, Granta can speak to South Caicos, South Caicos can speak to North Caicos. So you get the picture. Mm-hmm. And all of that without any middleman. Mm-hmm. The plus to that, we can also speak regionally. So we have the ability now to communicate with CDMA in Barbados. We can speak to Jamaica and all of that, like I'm saying, without any intermediary piece of equipment or any other provider. So this is point-to-point communication. Mm-hmm. So again, while it might not be our first line of communication, our go-to, it presents that resilience and that robustness in the event that our conventional lines fail. So that is one of the advancements that we have achieved thus far. Some persons may argue that is old technology, but like I always say, sometimes the old is where we go to in the end. So that piece of technology is there as our backbone. If all else fails, we resort to that. And again, I want to highlight the need for persons to step up, to get trained in the use. We need people to volunteer because it's not as simple as picking up a cell phone and dialing. However, it does get the job done.
Thank you so much. And I think that is really, really good news because, I mean, in the past, you'd have situations where islands may not be able to, will not able to communicate with anybody. So at least with this system, we know that at least someone, you can speak with someone. So that's very, very good and that's commendable. Thank you so much for that. So then, how significant would you say telecommunications is during emergencies? Especially during hazards. I mean, we're in the hurricane season, we can't escape it. We do know that emergencies occur outside of the hurricane season. But how significant do you think telecommunication is?
Ms. Gordon, that question is one that I'm struggling to find a proper answer. So let me give you a scenario. And I believe if I paint the picture in our minds, the answer might be very clear. So TCI, I want you to imagine that it is a dark night. The wind is howling and rain is coming down terribly. And all of a sudden we lose the electricity. You're nervous, your family is nervous, your children are nervous. You don't know what is happening and we know it's chaos out there. The fact that you know that you could reach out and let the emergency services know that we need help because maybe our roof has gone down, maybe somebody in our family has taken ill, because in an emergency, there might just be another emergency. Mm-hmm. The ability to communicate that we need help cannot be understated, right? Mm-hmm. So the importance, if you can't communicate, then you may as well realize that it's hopeless. Mm-hmm. So in order to restore hope, we need to ensure that we can communicate regardless of what's the condition out there, be it rain, be it earthquake, be it tsunami. We need to have the ability to communicate so that our responders know that we need their help and know where to go.
Thank you so much for that. You know, that really put my mind to several, at least two that I can recall in recent times, where we have had like aircraft, you know, those going down, and then communication definitely is crucial for us to be able to, you know, effect search and rescue. So reliable communication definitely, based on what you're saying, is critical and it's very, very important. TCI is a multi-island state. What role does telecommunications play in ensuring that emergency services can be deployed quickly and effectively across all islands?
I tell you, like earlier on I mentioned, you cannot overstate the need for communications. And when you look at TCI, as you said, it's a multi-island state. It's not as simple as jumping in a car and just drive over to wherever the need is. You need to know that you may not be able to use the plane, you may not be able to use the boat given the situation at the time. However, the responders in each of those islands, if they cannot coordinate, meaning there's no communication that tell them where they need to be. It's all well and good to have the team ready and on standby, but if you cannot give them the message and tell them where they need to go to do the job, you may as well not have them. So that communication aspect is absolutely necessary for the functioning of the whole disaster management response. The coordination. How does the NEOC move its men, right? Whether it be police, fire, health teams, Red Cross, from one location to another, letting them know what is needed at each point. That cannot be achieved without proper and reliable communications. So I hope that really answers your question. We cannot do it if we cannot communicate.
Listeners, you're tuned to Radio Turks and Caicos 89.1 FM, and it is the Disaster 365 radio show. I have with me Mr. Fabian Lewis, who is the Radio and Telecommunications Manager at the Department of Disaster Management and Emergencies. And I'm your host, Alison, having a very interesting conversation with Mr. Lewis. What is the current state of the telecommunication network here in the TCI, and how is it positioned to handle the peak of the hurricane season?
Okay, that's an interesting question, but let me put it in a different way. You're talking about the peak of the hurricane season. We at DDME, we strive to have our system not based on a disaster threat, but we need to have our system operational regardless of whether we have fair weather or horrible weather out there. Great. So to answer that question more appropriately, our network is so devised right now. We have a series of VHF radios. And of course, I think I mentioned earlier the network of HF that we have deployed in each island. So let us talk a little bit about our VHF. So our VHF allows for point-to-point communication, where if our teams go out, they can communicate with the NEOCs, right? And they can pass information to and from. We're talking about those persons that might be deployed in the shelters, our shelter managers who have received the training, right? They now would have equipment that they can always talk back to the NEOCs to give information on things like possibly number of persons at the shelter, what the needs are. We may need extra blankets, we may need foodstuffs, whatever is necessary. That information can be transmitted to the NEOC, and they can effectively move the items that is necessary. So right now, the setup that we have is a series of VHF repeaters, which we are constantly working on and fine-tuning, and we have HF throughout. So that allows for local communication, that's in-island communication. We have intra-island communication, meaning each island can speak to each other. And of course, We have regional communication where our TCI, Collective Islands, can now speak to other islands should we need help. We have the HMS Midway, which is part of our support team and our disaster response, that we can communicate should we need them, and if they're close enough that they would effectively respond. So all of that is done without the conventional communication. When I say conventional, I'm talking about no cell phones, I'm not talking about internet, I'm talking about using things other than what normal people use. Yeah.
Thank you for that. And HMS Medway is connected to the UK, correct? It's
Yes,
a part
they
of
are.
the UK arm.
Yes, they are.
Right. Thank you so much for that one. Of course, so when disaster strikes, there is a Murphy's Law that says anything that can go wrong will go wrong. When disaster strikes, things can and do go wrong. Communications line can go down. And that's where redundancies come in. You would have mentioned earlier on, you know, some of the specific redundancies that we have in place. Is there anything you want to add to that you would have articulated earlier?
Even if I had mentioned it, I think it's important that I say it again because it's absolutely important. It doesn't matter how many pieces of equipment that we have, how much technology that we have at our disposal. If we do not get the relevant persons to step up, become volunteers, and be part of the movement, then our equipment is just equipment. We have fancy things.
Yeah.
So we need persons to be a part of the disaster. And like you said earlier, disaster is everybody's business. So we need everybody to take on their part of the business. Those that have the interest, come up, get trained so that they can be part of that team. And I'm sorry, I'm speaking only about the telecoms aspect of things right now. There are lots of other areas that volunteers can take part in, but for now, I'm talking about strictly radio. They can become volunteers, get that training, and become that hero in their own little local areas should the disaster strike and we are cut off, that they know how to set up equipment and get communications going. So that would be my last words.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. You know, I can't help but asking a next question, right? Which is, you've been asking and you've been encouraging the public to join forces. What's the staff complement for the radio communications unit?
I'm so happy that you said that because you wouldn't believe it. We have only 2 persons in the radio and communication unit. We have myself and we have Mr. Dwayne Simmons, who is located in Grand Turk. So if something were to happen within the TCI ambit, the reliance would be on myself and Mr. Simmons. What I would like to see happen is a cadre of volunteers, and did I say that loudly enough? We need a cadre of volunteers to take up the mantle that can support each island. Mr. Simmons is ready to go to help anybody that's willing to be trained. I myself willing to help anybody who's willing to be trained. And they can come from all of the other islands because what we would like is a group from each of the islands.
Right.
Trained, ready to go. And like I said, it is not just a disaster thing. There are the sides of it that allows persons to just enjoy radio on the whole in terms like a hobby and whatnot. But it puts you in a very good place that you can respond should the need arise from a disaster standpoint.
Thank you so much. And just to add that on each island, we do have a community preparedness officer. So you will have, you know, they can go to the community preparedness officers on island. And as one team, we will, you know, get that information and that going. So thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you so much for that. So beyond the immediate response, because we've been talking about response and we're talking about the need for resources in terms of volunteers, but beyond the immediate response, how does telecommunications play a part in the recovery phase, ensuring that essential services and communication channels are restored for that long-term recovery?
Well, absolutely. It's absolutely important. And from that, like I said earlier on, without communication, nothing works. So the recovery phase, while we have responders out there doing the necessaries, we need to recognize that coordination is a big aspect of it. The construction teams that will go out for them to probably demolish buildings that have been damaged and then for them to erect new ones, they need to be able to coordinate. And again, that is for coordination. We may have situations where the police are required during the whole rebuild because maybe sensitive areas are damaged and sensitive stuff needs to be protected. The police would have to coordinate that. And I'm just pulling out some agencies here so you get the idea. Red Cross might go out because they need to assist certain persons, right? And they need to have that coordination between them, the teams, to make sure that persons get the necessary hurricane relief and whatnot. So beyond the immediate, communication is absolutely important because it lends itself nicely to the whole coordination of that effort.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. And I need to put in a plug here for the TCI regiment because they are also critical part and we work very, very closely together. So I think we just want to highlight them, and it's a synergy. It's really everybody working together for that fast recovery and where we build back better, we build with resilience. And therefore that now, my last question to you maybe. So we talk about the whole matter of lessons learned. What are some of the lessons that you think we could learn or we have learned as it relates to those incidents where the communication gaps posed were challenging? What were some of the lessons learned from that?
Some of those lessons may be a hard pill to swallow, but the truth is we needed to understand that the direction that we've been going with our telecom system, while we're employing more technology and advances, we need to also have that backbone of probably not so much modern technology, but the backbone that allows for more robustness. So that redundancy, and we have opened up and we're using all platforms, right, to create that measure of resilience. So we've learned that lessons from past experience, and we know that having one system is not the key to everything. So we're employing multiple systems to allow for that ultimate resilience. So we've learned that lesson. We also are learning from the concept, and I'm saying it again, that we need people. We need people to get involved. Most persons think that DDME is the end of everything, and whenever there's a situation, oh, it's DDME. But we need to understand that everybody is DDME. We at DDME's office might be the persons doing the necessary moving of the parts, the coordination here. But the players, the true heroes on the field, are the individuals that come out to do the necessary work, the volunteers that go out there to make it happen. Okay, so we, TCI, everybody is DDME, and we need those persons, and we've learned those lessons, and that's why I'm employing persons, those of us that can, able, please join the team so that we make a stronger, more robust TCI, and that's on all levels.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So my final question to you, Mr. Lewis, we want to hear about the vision, the short-term and the long-term goals to enhance communication, the telecommunications network. If you were asked, and I'm asking you now to articulate your vision, short-term and long-term, what would that be?
I'm taking a second here. I want to make sure I collect the thoughts very correctly. Short-term visions. Okay, so short-term, I'm thinking in the next few months before Christmas. Right. I want to ensure that all the islands, and I think we're probably 75% there, all the islands have that measure of communication and personnel. I will not leave that out because we need the personnel. In the short term, have that personnel, groups throughout the islands that can effectively do something should communications go down. So that's short term. The long term, and all be dependent on how technology has improved over the years as we go forward. I think every state might be thinking exactly the same thing. We need to have or achieve that level of communication on multiple platforms that would allow for both audio and visual, communication. Again, I'll go back to the whole concept of using a platform like WhatsApp. WhatsApp can be a very good tool, especially during disaster situations, but it has one flaw. And that flaw is that it's dependent on an external network to function. And we must appreciate that during a disaster situation, and this is not me casting shade on Digicel and Flow and whatnot, but within the DDME context, we're trying to move to a position where from a disaster response, our network is not dependent on those providers. So in our long term, that is the direction I would like to see it go. And again, like I said, to have incorporated both audio and visual communication, and may I dare say data also. So that's the vision for long term.
Thank you so much. I really should have said your short term and your long term goals, but your answers remain the same, and I really want to thank you. Any final words just before we wrap, Mr. Lewis? Final words?
Other than thanking you so much for being here, it has been a pleasure. I want to take the opportunity to remind TCI that whilst the hurricane season is on, disaster is never in season. It is always something that you have to be prepared for. So like we say in disaster management, if you don't prepare, you are preparing to fail. So we are constantly in a state of preparedness and readiness. And with that, I want to invite once again persons to come out, TCI, come out and be part of disaster management team.
Well, that's a perfect way on which to end. Listeners, thank you so much for tuning in to Disaster 365 here on Radio Turks and Caicos 89.1 FM. My guest for the last 2 episodes was Mr. Fabian Lewis, Radio and Telecommunications Manager at the Department of Disaster Management and Emergencies. Thank you so much, Mr. Lewis, for your time, for sharing such valuable information. And I want to end on by echoing your sentiments by saying volunteers, volunteers, volunteers. We need you. That's all for now, and we will see you next week when we'll have another exciting guest to take you through Disaster 365, Radio Turks and Caicos 89.1 FM. I'm your host, Alison Gordon. Take care.